Hi, everybody. So I've kind of kicked around the idea of this video or like a workshop in some form for a little while, where I wanted to compile basic tips and bullet points for Pilates teachers, whether new or experienced, just based on my own length of time as one, not fixating necessarily on very like things you've heard all the time. I mean, maybe you've heard some of these, but as genuinely honest as I can give to you, all like the nonsense and the uncomfortable stuff and the things that I had to like work through and crawl through in the beginning stages. And then honestly, I think a lot of teachers would echo and go, yeah, me too. But you just don't necessarily hear talked about too much. And that's what I would prefer to just talk about, is to give that to you. I pride myself on being like a very authentic and honest person for whatever that's worth. Most people in that kind of a world can turn off just as many people as you can bring towards you. I don't want to sound too harsh to say I don't care, but I don't care. This is the reality, or is as it's been my reality. And through crowdsourcing with many Pilates teachers, as I said, a lot of them would agree. So I'm just here to discuss all of that and hope that in some way helps or finds you. So my last little waiver disclaimer is this isn't necessarily fact. It's my opinion. It's my experience. So take that for what it's worth. And that would be one of my first lessons, is to take everything you learn in this industry from people for what it's worth. My video is going to be that from me. So I'm going to structure it simply like this. I don't really imagine it's going to take too long. But my clustered advice about teacher trainings, some of the stuff in it, coming out of teacher trainings into your first job, and some of that kind of stuff. And then when it comes to separately, class programming for clients, how do you come up with different variations? I'm not giving you any, but I'm going to say, like, where does the mindset come from? How do you get there? Really, like I said, just basic Cliff Notes, go-tos, hope that it helps you. Last and final, sociology of the client, which I think is as much of your job as it is to teach footwork. To learn, to build the relationship. How do you keep them happy? How do you keep them coming back? But again, basic bullet points and just things that I've noticed from the 20,000 hours that I've spent in these rooms with people over and over. Okay, so to jump right into the teacher trainings, because that's about as far back as we can go, my first bullet point would be to stop expecting that teacher trainings should be great. Pause for reaction. Literally any of them. Some of them are really good. None of them are perfect. That is all that I mean. And to expect that any teacher training is going to be perfect or even close to perfect is like expecting that you're going to find the perfect college that is going to know how to prepare you for the job you're going to get in 4 years when you don't even know what that job is or what your duties will be. Teacher trainings are there to give you really great understandings of principles, exercises, repertoire, business stuff, and there are some really, really good ones out there. But that will in no way, shape, or form mean that you are going to come out and step into to actual teaching and feel prepared. And it also won't mean that after 6 months of it, you won't realize that you need to throw out about half of it and never think of it again. Or that you can add to some of it. Or that the bodies in front of you will have just challenged and completely screwed with some of the things that you learned there and made you question some of the other things that you learned there because of it. This is just the nature of. There is a lot of talk about teacher trainings in this industry, as there always have been. The good ones, the bad ones, the classical ones, the scientific ones, the this, the that. You hope to land in a solid one. But from there, your education starts the second you open the door to your first client. And as I think there's a Bruce Lee quote out there somewhere, I can't quote verbatim because I'm speaking into a camera and I don't have it in front of me, but it's like, take what's useful, discard what isn't, add something of your own. let this be your guide. You'll always have some of the things that you learned in teacher training, but some of them you also go, hey, that was BS. Don't overthink it. It doesn't make the training bad. It just means life has taught you different. Point 2 is about continuing education. What kind do you get? What kind do you focus on? Taking Pilates workshops is amazing, sometimes so much fun, and you come away with like a new idea of saying something a certain way or applying a movement a certain way. It's a wonderful thing. Take them if you love them. Getting outside of your Pilates bubble will be indispensable to the strength and the length of your career as a teacher. And getting outside of that doesn't need to mean taking more workshops or getting more certifications. It can. It means like picking up a book. And it means even stepping outside of fitness. Remembering that really all of us are running our own business. Even if you work for somebody else, if you're working for yourself, it's clearly a business. But if you are working in a studio or for a gym, you really still are a business, because if you are a human walking, talking skill set, then what you're trying to do is sell what you know, sell who you are. Reading about communication skills, as I mentioned earlier, sociology of the human behavior and how to apply that in setting, learning types, customer service. As I came from the formal business world and into this one, I found it shocking, the lack of basic ideas of how to run an actual business and apply communication and customer service skills within that environment. These things will make you not just a better teacher, but earn more money and take care of yourself. Indispensable skills. Point 3 is really just to kind of add to that as far as learning other things. Learn other things. As not just Pilates, but in terms of like the fitness world. The more you know, even if it's just at a basic level of other modalities, whether that be Zumba, strength training, the basics of that, the biomechanics of the human body, absolutely. Learn the angles, learn the techniques that bias a different muscle group. Yoga, it doesn't even matter. Learn them all a little bit. Maybe do them all a little bit. The more you do it, the more you start to see, or your brain starts to see, that damn, a lot of this is the same. And we want it to be, don't we? Because formal exercise with pretty little names like Pilates and yoga are just things that we slapped on organic motion to pretend like we own it. But the bottom line is it's just human motion. So things like a single leg deadlift or a warrior 3 or some sort of arabesque, right? These are all different modality names for essentially the exact same human motion. And as we start to see that, I think things become clearer, and we can step outside of like what Pilates is and what Pilates isn't, and we're just able to see the person in front of us and how this type of motion applies to their body, and not get so fixated on like names. What is the name of that exercise? And the opposite of that vein would be, I would say that when you learn something like a similar motion and how it cross applies to different modalities, you'll often hear opposing viewpoints, cues, technique, setup, and intent about the exact same motion across different fitness types. And when you hear them being opposed to each other and almost contradicting each other, that stretches you. It stretches you in a way where you think, that's right, we are kind of just applying our own ideas to this motion about what's maybe safe, what's maybe optimal, and we've created a construct. Within the construct of yoga, it's more the intent to be in this shape, like this, that, and the other. And yet when we make the exact same shape in Pilates, our intent and our application might be completely different. So who's right, who's wrong? No one, because there is necessarily no right and wrong. There is only our intention. And when we learn that there can be so many different intentions in the exact same position or pose or execution, you again stretch yourself outside of that Pilates bubble where we learned a way, right? We learned the setup, we learned how to get in, and that's like the way we do it. That's the way you were taught to do it. the more tools you have in your toolbox, the bigger it grows. So I encourage you to step outside of the fitness world education when it comes to learning. Learn about business, learn about communication, learn about that, and step outside of Pilates and just try to strip away the words so you can just see motion. A quick note and a quick extra bullet on what might be controversial to say out loud, but on contraindications, on someone's physical limitation based on a diagnosis or something in their life where they were told that they shouldn't do a thing because of a thing. We all have to learn them. We all should learn them. Whatever the current science and research is that is out there right now about what someone should do when they're pregnant and not do, what someone should do if they have a this, that, and the other in their back. Learn it, read it. And then, in my opinion, I feel like I have to extra say that when it comes to this particular point. People are human beings, and you'll know these things, and then you will meet these people with these things, and they will show you quite the opposite. They will show you that they're perfectly capable of controlled training the things that they were told that they shouldn't do, and that there will actually be things that you'll learn are supposed to be good for someone with that thing. I'm not even using any actual types of diagnosis because then that'll like come back at me. But there'll be something that you're supposed to be like really good and useful for somebody with that diagnosis that person thinks feels really crummy or makes them feel worse. And that's what's called being alive. Like we're like living human things with like multifactorial reasons for pain and limitation. So even though we've learned that something might apply to them and be good, that person might disagree. And we might learn that certain things aren't good for someone, and that person it makes them feel stronger and they feel like they can do that. So why should you hold them back? I put that out there. I don't know a lot of other teachers that behind closed doors wouldn't agree with me. I'll just say that right now. Experience teaches you differently. And I found that to be true with one of my very first private clients that coming out of training was over 80, had her shoulder, her rotator cuff specifically, had a tear in 3 places. So she didn't have shoulder range above here or here. So we had to train her arm across her like it was paralyzed. But she had been doing Pilates for 30 years, had full-blown osteoporosis for about 20 of those years, was quite strong because of all of that Pilates experience. But because of how the osteoporosis was, as me of a teacher coming out of training, well, I'm not supposed to be flexing, extending, rotating, side bending her spine for the most part. Holding neutral doesn't really work because she couldn't weight bear on her arm. So what do I have to give this person who's really strong and wants to work really hard, even though she was like 83? Are we just going to be doing like side leg and like dead like bugs for an hour? And then like the day that I met her, she walked in, and I can still remember to this day, she walked in and I waited for her as she still worked. She still worked full time. So she drove there. And she got out of the car and she came in and she sat down on the seat and she bent all the way over to take off her boots. It was in the winter. Took off her boots by picking her leg up and flexing her back over. Then bent down to pick up her bag, reach up, lean, extend her back to hang up her coat. The point is that in like the 90 seconds I watched her to get ready for the session, she moved her back exaggeratedly through every single range of motion that my contraindications told me she shouldn't do. And I went, why should I not be the one to put her in them when we can strengthen them for her? The second you start to see the common sense starts to make you question things. And that's all I mean. And we built a relationship from there. And the relationship is what really matters when it comes to a lot of that. Talking to each other, what feels right, let's not be excessive. Let's try to like pay attention to how things are going. And that's what I'll leave about contraindications. Learn them, know them, stay up on them. You know, the research changes all the time. When I was pregnant with my first 12 years ago, I remember lots of things I was being told that I shouldn't do that now pregnant women are supposed to be fine doing. I didn't do them because they told me I shouldn't. Even though deep down I was like, but why can't I? Science changes. Sometimes we kind of know better before that happens. This is what I found. On your teaching voice, this is a thing I think we all have to encounter, right? Most of us aren't public speakers until we're public speakers. And if you're a natural introvert, that's even like weirder to step out in front of a crowd and start to talk and demonstrate and all that stuff. But finding a teaching voice is like extra specially different, I think. And what I always found as like a helpful thing to think of was the same advice you would get or give if you were to give a like a best man or a maid of honor speech, if you've ever done that. Usually the advice is be what you are. If you're funny, be funny. If you're not funny, don't try to be funny. It won't land, right? If you're not an emotional person, don't try to tell a sweet story. People will smell that. It's always the case, right? Like be yourself, and yourself means whatever your voice is in terms of how you interact with people in real life. And that will always land the best. I joke that for the first about 18 months of teaching, I tried to be Meredith Rogers. If you're familiar with Meredith Rogers' amazing teaching style, I took so many Pilates Anytime classes prior, and early on into my my certifications, and I loved her classes. And since I didn't have a teaching voice, I sort of like adopted hers. And while I'd never met you, if you're ever watching, and I adore your classes and your teaching, but that is like not my voice. And I try to teach my math classes talking in this really calming, soothing, methodical voice of hers. And it was so phony. And deep down, like I knew it was phony, but like I didn't have my own way of speaking. And I remember it just changing when I got to know a handful of the ladies in my first math class. And the more I got to like know them a little bit, it felt weirder to talk to them casually before and after class the way that I am right now. And then lay in front of the class and be like, and roll your spine down like you're putting pearls on it. Like, I'm like, what am I doing? Like, they know that I don't talk like that. And so started to talk like myself. The soonest you can realize how are you as a person? If you're a sarcastic person, I teach a class and I'm sarcastic. I don't take anything too seriously. That's just how I am. And that's just the kind of thing you're going to get. So I hope that you find your voice sooner rather than later, because it's really uncomfortable for you as the teacher to be trying to sound like someone else. We're already so preoccupied with like, what do I say and how do I say it and how do I get this person to do a thing? That trying to think about like how it should sound when it comes out is like a whole other thing you don't need to be concerned about. So as soon as you can get comfortable just talking and just being yourself, you will take leaps and bounds in your teaching. Okay, so 2 more tips based on this whole teacher training coming out of teacher training thing. This next one is kind of like an add-on to the finding your voice. I have found, and many other people have agreed the same, that many studio owners, gym managers, and even the clients who come to your classes and whatnot, they want to turn you into them, or they want to turn you into a past experience that they enjoyed. So to clarify, you found your voice, right? You use your voice. And then these class managers or gym owners or studio owners pull you aside and say, you cue too much. Talk like this. Or you cue too little. Talk like this. Or you go too fast. You go too slow. Your programming should be like this. Do less of that. Or clients come to you and they say, this is too easy. This is too hard. I think the music should be louder. We shouldn't have any music. And I think you all know what I'm talking about. But can you ever make a room full of people happy anywhere in life over anything ever? No, you can't. You can't make everybody happy. And I'm not saying not to take criticism and sit with it. No, not at all. Because criticism can be like really valuable and necessary, and maybe they're trying to help you. I would sit with whatever the criticism is, take a step back from it and say, is this valid, what they're saying? If I change to what they told me, could that be like a leveling up of how I'm teaching? Or is this just how they teach? If it's the client, is this just how they've enjoyed other classes before? Because those things don't matter. You are not those other teachers and those studio owners. You don't have to teach like them. And you are not the classes that this other person has taken. And great if they enjoyed them. You don't have to make yours like them. So maybe your teaching can use improvement. All of ours could. And those tips might be great tips. But I have had moments where like 4 different gym managers, because there was a point I was teaching at like 7 at one time, and I was observed in back-to-back classes at 4 different clubs. So those managers all pulled me aside and gave me, let's say, 5 or 6 teaching tips on how to change my class. So then I went to the next club and I taught my next class to another manager, and she pulled me aside and gave me 5 or 6 tips that went against what the first person said. And I was like, oh, I just took the notes from the first person. And now you're telling me that sucks. Okay. So then I went to the third club and I tried to teach to what like the second one did. And the third one pulled me aside and gave me notes. You see where I'm going here, is that none of them actually had good notes. They were all just giving me notes to try to teach like them. And by the third person, I went, what a bunch of bullshit. And I just ignored any of it from that point forward. So certain critiques I've gotten, and they have been like really good points. And I still pride myself on learning, and I want to learn and I want to do better. But some people just don't have the best motivation. So I hope that you also learn to discern and determine their motivation and thicken your skin if necessary and move on. Move on from the people who don't know how to keep their mouth shut, when keeping their mouth shut would be the appropriate action. Oh, okay. So last note on the sort of entrance into teaching. I know I had another one. Props. So props, and that kind of forays us into the next section, which is all about classes, but it still kind of goes into the entry-level teaching. Props have a bad rep, or at least they used to. I don't know if that's different now, especially after COVID. But it was always the old way of thinking that if you use props or overuse props in a math class, that you're often like a worse teacher, like you're looking for an easy way out, or you're just complicating things that don't need to be complicated, or whatever else. I think that is hilarious. I think it's hilarious, and I think it's stupid. And let me tell you why. It is stupid and hilarious because the apparatus that I am sitting on, plus the $5,000 reformer in the other room, and all the rest of it are just ridiculously expensive props. That probably bruised some teachers, right? They are, right? So like they're there to provide resistance, to provide assistance and feedback. We love them for this. They're just really heavy props. So why is that like weird that a group of 15 in a big classroom where it's distracting and there's like a lot of bodies and there's one voice would crave stimulus and the feedback that people could get on an apparatus during a math flow? Wanting the ball, wanting the band, wanting it as much as they want it. You know, I'll hear the whole, I'm not against props, but I'm against overusing them or using where they're inappropriate. Well, in my opinion, they are never inappropriate if it helps the people in the class find a connection, be able to focus better, and get feedback that the privileged people on the apparatus get in every single exercise of the class. And that is the end of my note on that. But as you can see, my feathers get ruffled because like I always use props in my classes because I didn't at first, as I was classically trained and I wanted to teach a certain way. And then eventually brought some bands, and I watched as my class grew. And yeah, it grew because like people like toys and I was just the girl who brought the bands. But I also watched as the movement got better, as their focus got better. They were able to slow down and have something to press into. We're teachers of closed chain energy, right? We love this apparatus because it locks up the joints. It gives us a place for us to press and push and pull. And so when you're freestyling a mat flow, that's not there a lot of the times. And we know that. That's why we consider it harder. We'll say mat work is harder because we don't have the things. Yeah, so sometimes people like the things. So I'm all about the things. Overuse the things. If it gives people in your classes the experience that they're looking for, don't feel shame. You're not a worse teacher. Go forth and purchase. You can find great deals. Amazon. So moving into section 2 out of 3, we're talking class plans and tips. I say class, but I can mean sessions too, just anything where you're teaching. I'm going to start with spring guides. So we're discussing apparatus. I think spring guides are largely useless. It's a strong word, but I think that they're pretty useless. We all learn them. It's teacher training. This is the exercise. This is the setup. This is the spring. But I don't know how true that like ever is because the formula is really strength in that one position in relation to the person's body proportion and weight, and all of this in every single scenario changes. Let's just, for example, I weigh 103 pounds. When I sit on the chair, if I'm doing anything like a teaser or a side bend, I have to have it on the lightest weight possible on the chair. And even then, I'm sometimes thrown off. Like for me to press down the pedal, even on the lightest spring, not because I'm not strong, but because the spring pressure weighs more than me and shoves me away. It's the same thing on the reformer. I consider myself relatively strong in a lot of positions, but I can't go up in spring weight in a lot of positions because I'm too light and it pushes me off of the machine. This is why I prefer free weights to spring weight in a lot of cases. That same type of opposition where I'm on a machine that will move it or me by me pushing the weight is not the same as me just like lifting weight up. My proportion is small. Another person's who might be like larger or a little heavier, you learn a spring tension, you put it on, and they're not feeling challenged at all. You go up heavier and higher and higher, and they still don't think it's that challenging because their body weight is anchoring them and they don't have to fight the force of the spring. Entirely different from my own experience. Does that mean I'm not strong and they are, or because I'm not being anchored and they are? It was just a convoluted example to tell you that like it really, the guides mean so little. You have to just think to yourself that the basic idea is that the lighter the spring weight, the less it supports the motion. The heavier the spring weight, the more it supports the motion. The heavier the spring weight, the more it weights the limbs. The lighter the spring weight, the less it weights the limbs. So if you just go based on that and you go, well, we're going to do a plank and I want it to be really heavy for their shoulders to push, you're going to pick a heavier spring weight, something pretty heavy. If they can't push it with their shoulders, you go down from that a little bit. If you don't want it to be too heavy on their shoulders and you want it to just be like a really challenging core exercise, you're going to go lighter. But even within the confines of those ideas, you have to determine their own body weight and their own strength. Are their shoulders really strong? Or is that like a weaker part of them versus the rest of their body? There's just too many elements, in my opinion, to give many spring guides. And even on like our Instagram accounts and whatnot, if we ever post exercise, I say we because I mean all Pilates teachers, you will always get people in the comments section, if you don't reference the spring weight, who ask, what were you doing this on? But what does that matter? I mean, you see the exercise, like just try the exercise and like pick a spring. I really don't like when people, I'm like, I don't know, one medium, what is the difference? Yeah, do the exercise and then see what you need. If I was doing a bicep curl and it looks like medium, maybe I wasn't doing speedy, maybe I was a medium challenge, would you be like, what were you doing that bicep curl with? No, you'd be like, well, if I have to do a bicep curl, let me go find the weight that I can do the bicep curl with and it be challenging. Like you kind of inherently know that. I'm picking up a weight. It doesn't really matter what she did it with. Maybe she does bicep curls more often than me. So, it's the math. It's the formula. So approach it as a formula and figure out the formula with the client. Extra little note on that. Don't be ashamed. I think it comes across or like to some teachers, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. Or I know less what I'm doing if I have to ask, is this the right spring? Do you want me to add more? Do you want me to add less? Or I often just open with that. Hey guys, like if I'm teaching a class, let's put on like this, that, the other spring. I might be wrong. Let's just give it a shot. Let me know after 2 reps how that feels. That might not be your voice, but like that's how I open it up. I might be like entirely off. I have to start you with something. Let's start there. Oh, okay. On the discussion of contemporary variations. This doesn't mean that you as a person watching is necessarily a contemporary teacher, but let's just talk about that for about 60 seconds. My personal definition of Pilates, and it has changed, and it usually does every year, changes what it is. I now essentially just describe it as controlled end range resistance training, which can kind of actually apply to several different modalities, as you may or may not kind of thinking of right now. I call it that way because it just is. And as far as rather like this is what it encompasses, and it has all these principles, and controlled end range resistance training kind of does it for me, right? We're moving far through the motions rather than just a portion. We're using resistance, whether it's like opposition we're trying to find or actual resistance we're giving someone. And yeah, that's what we're doing, right? It's a strength training of sorts, end range style with control. To that end, when I see it that way, right, that this is what I'm doing, and I'm thinking less about a very specific repertoire, then people like me, other people who are considered contemporary teachers, will just be in a classical position and asking themselves usually just a few basic questions. Here I am in this position. Let's call it a plank. It just seems like an easy go-to. I'm in a plank. Where can I create more space for this body to be in a plank? More space. I can elevate their feet. I can elevate their hands. I can elevate one of their feet. What could I elevate their foot on? Now this can apply to like a mat class as well as it can apply to being on the apparatus, right? Like, okay, maybe I want the foot, like let's go on the reformer. We're in long stretch. My hands are on the foot bar. My feet are against or inside of the shoulder rests. And I'm saying these things. And I say, I want to create more space. Or maybe let's say I want to create less. Let's say I want to create less space. I'm going to lower the foot bar all the way down. I'm going to put their feet on the shoulder rests, and now their hands and feet are closer together. I'm going to put their feet on the shoulder rests, and maybe I'm going to have them like lift. We're creating a difference of space from the floor, right? If this is on a mat, I go, how can I create more space under their legs, but I still have them on something? Well, I could put them on a foam roller. I can put them on a big ball. Or maybe I want to put their hands higher and I can put them on a chair. We're just making space, and that's where props come in, right? Like higher, lower, all the things. I want them to do a roll down, but sitting on the floor or sitting on the mat. We learn these things in teacher training, right? Like maybe that's too much hip flexion for them, or getting down on the ground is challenging. We get the reformer box, so they're farther from the floor. We raise the floor. So why is that different in a mat class? We can sit on a box in a mat class, or we can sit on a kitchen chair. We create more space. These are the things that we contemporary teachers just tend to ask ourselves more times than classical teachers do. And this is where some of those variations come from. Or we're saying, how can I make this motion heavier? How can I make it heavier? I already referenced some there, right? Lift a leg. Sometimes us crazies are enough to be like, can you lift a hand off the bar, right? Like you're going to lose a limb and that's going to be harder. We change the spring tension. We take it away, right? Maybe a little bit, we'll mention a little more on that later, but we're making the motion heavier and harder to control. We also, and I think these three things kind of encompass like the space, making it heavier. And then in the last is like a big, broad question of what else, what other angles. So I'm in the long stretch position. My foot bar is lower. My feet are higher. I'm just telling you, so this is like how like our brains work, right? So I've changed the space because now our feet and hands are almost level on the shoulder blocks and on this lowered foot bar. I still want to make it heavier. Oh, so I had them lift one leg. So now it's the space has changed. It's heavier because their leg is up. Then they start to go, what else? This person still isn't challenged. What else? What angles can I change? What other motion is available? Their leg can go side to side, right? Their leg can come in and out as the machine moves past them. Their knee can tuck in towards their... What other motions does the human leg make inside of the human body? And all of those things are available if they're there. And I think those three things encompass all of the creativity that you see everywhere of people making up exercises. It's just taking the same setup that everyone uses classically and just changing those three elements. Spaces for things, the weight load, which isn't just spring tension, it's real limbs and whatnot, and also asking the questions of what angles and shapes can I make here while I'm here that would change the bias and change the challenge. So that's sort of like, broadly speaking, an easy way to start changing stuff up if you become a person who changes stuff up. Note on actually planning classes and sessions. This isn't like ever discussed, to the best of my knowledge, in any teacher training. I would love, if you're watching this, to write me a note and tell me if that wasn't true in yours. But I have never heard one who's like sat down with the teachers and said, this is about the amount of exercises you'll probably need. This would be like sort of, maybe because they're teaching the order, and I don't really know. But again, it's like you shy away from certain subjects, and I think that that's strange. But here's the deal. You have an hour. Most of the time, right? You have an hour. How many exercises are you going to wind up going through inside of that hour? I'm giving just an idea based on my own experience, and then like what would change and why. I always go into classes and sessions with about 9 to 10 sequences, setups, like sequence setups. So like rolling down, blah, blah, blah. Like if we're laying on our back doing stomach work, that's one, like that. Not calling leg circles one, like the whole, whatever you're doing laying down. So I usually go in with about like 9 to 10 in my mind, whether it's a client session or a class, based on the pace of that person or people, like the class that you're teaching. If they're a slower paced class, you're not going to speed them through. Or if they're a faster paced class, maybe it will be less than that. Maybe it'll be like more like 7. If you're a really slower paced teacher, maybe it's even less than that. But I think if it's less than that, then you're going to be missing things. So in my opinion, I think like the 7 to 10 range of different bulked setups is pretty often is hit, because otherwise you're going to be missing stuff. As far as like what I make sure to always include, I'm actually going to reference my list just so I don't like forget something and be like mad about it later. When I quick sit down and just make sure I have like in my mind what I'm going to go through with people or a class, I always make sure to have something that is upper body driven. Like the upper body is driving the bus for some sequence, whether it's through weights or whether it's through the spring tension in the bar. But like there isn't a whole lot of other distracting going on this, but they are going to use their upper body. Definitely inside of the upper body element, I always make sure that their arms have a chance to go up over their head. There's plenty of other arm things to do, but me personally, if we're doing upper body, at some point their arms got to go here. I never leave that out. Standing strength, I always are going to put in as a separate, right? So we're at 2. Standing, where we're focusing on strength of their lower chain and some end range motions for like getting low, right? So we can call them like your squats or your lunges or whatever you want to call them. But where I want them to be focused on lower body strength, foot connection to the floor, and getting like down into stuff. That's always going to be a second element. And remember, this is me. I'm just giving you an idea. I'm saying I plan 9 to 10 sequences. This is how I do it. Something upper body driven, always this. This is 2, not in this order. Standing strength, end range stuff, making sure that they can get down low. 3rd, I usually have a second standing sequence. 2 times I want people up, but that second time will be more balance oriented, where they were focused before on strength stuff. This time, maybe we're one leg standing, maybe we're focusing on something that's a little unstable, their eyes being closed. This goes for the apparatus too, right? So if I'm doing chest expansion and I have their heels lifted, this would count as something that's more standing balance than I would consider standing strength, because even if we're squatting with it, they're balancing. So to me, that doesn't really count as end range strength because they're focused more on not falling over. So I would focus those 2 things separately. Okay, so then we have on their back something. So that's always going to be clustered, but I usually don't have people lay down on their back more than once, but this is just my style. I'm not a lay on your back kind of teacher. And when I say on your back something, I may say legs and straps counts, footwork counts, your stomach series counts. But if they're on their back, that's I checked that box. We had it. And that's going to and that might check a couple other boxes too, right? Because that's going to count as maybe their part of the spinal flexion if we're doing the ab work, because that's another one of my bullet points, to make sure that you're doing spinal flexion at some point. So maybe that checks 2 boxes, but they're on their back. So we've stood twice, we've done something upper body, and we're on your back doing some stuff. Back extension, something. I keep saying something because I don't know what positions are appropriate for the client or the class. Maybe they can't kneel. Maybe they can't lay flat on their stomach, but I want their back to do some sort of extension, some range somehow. So I'm going to find some position to gravity where that seems feasible and make sure that that's included. Body weight support, something. For the same reasons, maybe a full plank isn't completely accessible. Maybe kneeling on all fours isn't, but we could always put their hands against the wall at an angle that they can. I love to have people get used to at least a little bit having their body weight on their hands, at least just for the mental drive of knowing that your hands can come out in front of you and support you if need be, because I'm one of those people that tries to drive the we're going to fall over and catch ourselves kind of thing. So I usually will try to always make sure that there's a body weight something involved if they can. We are laterally something, side something. So maybe it's side leg, maybe it's side bending, maybe it's side on the box, right? Like we want a side bend and we want to use our side. Maybe it's lateral lunges, which again, we have overlap. This can shorten and check off so many boxes that your class feels like really well-rounded, right? So if I'm doing side splits on the reformer and we add speed skater, right? We have like a really nice lateral something, but we also have a really strong standing sequence. And then maybe before I get them down from that, I give them a weight and they press their arm up overhead, hold the machine out and do a side bend. Well, now we also have a side bend and we have an overhead shoulder press. So in a 3 to 4 minute sequence there, I've just checked off 5 things that I know I got done out of like my 10. right? And I got it done in one spot. So then I'm going to feel like, okay, I got those things in their body. They had a chance to practice them and I won't have forgotten anything. But something lateral, something side. And where are we? Oh, and then my last, which I just kind of clustered into one. And I left it for last because it's the obvious one. We're Pilates teachers. We want to make sure that the spine moves in all directions. So your flexion, your rotation, your side bending, your neutral. That's all got to be there. The reason I left it till last was because I actually tend to think of the positions I'm going to use for those first things I mentioned, like the upper body, the standing, the balance, the laying down. I'll kind of like lay that out. And then splicing in the spinal positions is like kind of easy, right? Because I'll like do that and go, okay, what spinal position isn't included in those things that I just did, right? Because maybe I already had the side bend in the standing strength thing. Okay, well, they did a side bend, so that was done. We're going to be doing reverse knee stretch. So they'll be flexing their spine in that one while doing body weight. So those two got checked. And I wind up just going down the list and being like, what back shape is missing? And, or do I think I'm still going to have time? And if I am, then I'm going to add a separate position to be like short box and doing tree, right? Which is technically a seated position, but we haven't had full spinal flexion yet. So I put that in there. So I almost like fill in the blanks with the spinal positions because it's easy enough to add in. If we were doing legs and straps and that doesn't actually include spinal flexion itself, I go, well, we haven't really like majorly flexed their spine yet. Well, we're going to do short spine. We're already there. So we laid that on our backs. We did some strength with the legs work. I need flexion, up and over they go. That's more or less how I build the session sequences, and I hope that's useful. The little extras that I also add in, grip strength when possible. If there's a way for me to have them hold on to something really tight, I'll also find that too, because it's an under practice thing for a lot of adults. That can be as simple as, if you don't have a Cadillac or something, the push through bar that I'm sitting next to, if I put the weight on from, like I put the spring tension on from underneath and then have them stand up and just hold it. That's what I'm trying, right? Like you're standing up, just having to hold it, it'll have to lift, right? And the tension is going to create like a lot on their grip. And you can do like a one leg stand. So here we are. Now I'm one leg standing and I'm balancing while this weight is trying to pull me down. That's going to cause me to have to use my grip strength that much tighter, my balance that much tighter, and I've knocked out the balance sequence on their leg. And there goes me checking off multiple boxes again. So if there was a way I can put in like a grip practice, I usually do that also. And sorry, I'm just making sure that I don't miss anything. I think whole side things. Oh yeah, and then I wrote a note about like transitioning them up and down. I do not shy away from making weird transitions between position. I mean, classical Pilates has specific transitions, right? Like you're doing handstand straps, you sit up, you bringing your legs to the side, you change the spring, you lay down. Like we have all of these transitions, and they make emphasis the fact that the transitions are on purpose. And I think the same. So hard agree with Pilates on that one. Do I necessarily agree that those transitions have to happen there that way? No, but I do enjoy the fact that like getting in and out of things is its own task. So I do agree. So when I'll structure those sessions and classes, I actually might on purpose change the order of a thing that we're doing so that they have to get up to down in like a weird twisted way, or have to go from kneeling this way to standing up and then going back. Like I will purposely do that as opposed to clustering things on the ground or clustering things in one place. I very much do the opposite. So they are encouraged to find their own, but that's what I don't do, right? Like I'm not actually giving them the way to get there. I just want them to have to get there. So I do that on purpose, but that's just my own stuff. Okay, another exercise note. One of my most implemented techniques is doing things one-sided, and one-sided doesn't have to mean like doing one side leg lift and doing the other. I mean, and you can think of the classical application of doing a roll down with a roll down bar, and instead of holding it with two hands, holding it with one. You're holding it with one, and that automatically means that this other arm is across your midsection or wherever. This means that you're going to be doing it a second time. So my main driving reason for finding one-sided elements of exercises is to reinforce having to do things twice. Pilates isn't known for second sets or just sets at all. We just do things once, we move on. It has its own reason for it. But I do think, and there's plenty of research behind this, that it is very important for humans to build not only skills physically, like, muscularly, but also neurologically, to repeat things over and over again. And just in the stress that we're trying to create on their human form in a certain position, I like having to do it twice. But all the way, if we also are separating elements, there's that much more to notice about like what our body's doing, and like have chances to like play around with that. And I love the elements that provides. Does it make things more challenging? Maybe. Some places definitely, some places maybe. I just think it's more interesting. So that's all. I love it thinking like even at I use roll downs because it's such a go-to in your mind, right? And you're rolling down in a math class, instead of both arms being here, you have one out here and you're going down. You have one out here and you're going down. You're holding a weight and you have one weight out here. That's like super weird on that anti-shift to the other side. Doesn't make it hard. Like, again, it's just, to me, it just makes it a little bit interesting, and it forces us to have to do the whole thing twice. So that is an element that I'll always use to double up your class, right? Now you have like less things that you have to like compile into the class, because that's going to take twice as long. And the other, and that kind of goes hand in hand with the other note, is that anything that you can do with two arms and two legs, you can do with one. So for all the repertoire that you wind up learning, you really automatically have double that, because you can do everything with one arm or one leg. Try to revisit the same examples to not distract. Something like chest expansion, you can do with one spring. Really hard to balance pulling back with only the one arm spring as opposed to the two. Definitely more challenging. Can you do chest expanse with one leg lifted? You absolutely can. So there you took your classical exercise of chest expansion, and you have that exercise, you let go of a spring, you have a new exercise. Grab the spring back, let go of a leg, you have a new exercise. So I'm just trying to get you to expand your ideas, and then look at how many other of those bullet points you just checked off by doing that. Now you have your standing balance series if you're doing it the one-legged way. This is where my mind goes, and how to build like a really well-rounded session, but also one that, while it feels like for the client is changing very often, right? Like, oh, like she's always changing something. That's another critique of contemporary instructors. To me, it's really not changing it though. Like, we are still inside the ballpark. It's just like we've like the game we're playing that day, but we've never left the stadium. We're still in the stadium. And I think that their bodies would suggest that they know that that's true, because things never look very foreign to my clientele, even though what they're doing always looks so varied. So that's it. It's like little tips of the trade, I guess. One-sided stuff is super awesome, and chopping off an arm and a leg immediately can keep you and your client less bored, teaching them to still work on skills, but the stimulus is just ever shifting. Let's ever so briefly talk about running out of time. It takes some time as you're teaching to figure out how to get things inside of like a 55-minute time block. Maybe you're someone who you notice chronically runs over, or maybe you're someone who is chronically running short on repertoire. Usually we're one or the other. We don't waffle back and forth. We're someone who's long-winded, or we're someone who's coming up short. So once you kind of determine which one of those you are, I think that you can kind of pick which one of these tips works for you. If you are a long-winded person, I would say I overplan and underdeliver. But that's just my preference, is I'd rather go in with too much than too little. And I've just gotten good at knowing how to cut. So at some point down the line, I started going, okay, at the 45-minute mark, assuming that you're starting on the hour. So 45 minutes in, I would take a quick clock check and make a mental note of like where I'm at in terms of checking the boxes of those movements that I wanted to do. So at 45 minutes, I go, okay, wow, I have like a whole lot left I wanted to do, and I do not have the amount of time to do it in. And that's where I'm going to make my choices. So as I'm making my cuts, the first things I want to make sure that I keep in is all the back movement. So I won't be heartbroken if I wind up losing like the grip strength element that I wanted to give them special, or the second standing sequence. That I purposely will put those standing sequences on polar sides of the workout. So they'll do like a strength one towards the beginning and maybe the balance one closer towards the end. So if I have to try to make cuts, I don't feel like I lost, oh, they didn't even stand on their feet today. Well, no, they did, because they stood on their feet towards the beginning. But I always want to make sure that all of the back motions are there. So if I'm prioritizing, then I'm going to cut out other things and just make sure, oh, we didn't do back extension, going to get that in. So like we'll jump to that. Trying to think what else I was going to say about the making cuts. Oh, the one-sided stuff, especially since I'm someone who does one-sided things so often. If you're doing one-sided things, as we mentioned a couple points ago, you have now doubled up the amount of time it takes you to do it again, right? So if you're doing side leg, just to use an easy one, and you're doing it towards the back end of the class, well, you have to leave yourself enough time to be able to turn them over and do the other side. So I've also learned that it's best to not have one-sided elements planned towards the last 15 minutes of what you have planned in your mind, right? Because if you wind up having to cut a side, then you're running out of time and you don't get to do the other side. So if I'm doing one-sided things, I'll like cluster those to know that they're going to like fit in the first 30 minutes, and then maybe leave some of that stuff, out of the last part. But just learn to get good at making cuts and prioritize that, if we are Pilates teachers trying to remain focused in on at least the mobility of their spine, that we don't leave any of that out, that they did have a chance to twist today and to bend to the side today and to do the things with their spine that we're trying to loosen up. Or if that's not true, maybe it isn't. Maybe your client has different goals and focuses. Make sure at the 15-minute mark that you didn't leave out the focus, their personal goal or whatever your goals were for them. If you are the person and the teacher who tends to run out of stuff, that's another kind of panicking feeling. You're getting to the 15-minute mark and like you got through all your exercises and you don't know what else to do. just redoing what you already did in a different position of gravity is an easy out. You're a mat, you went through all your stuff. Oh no, there's minutes left. What do I do? Almost go back in your mind to the stuff that you did at the beginning of the class, because people have probably forgotten. And instead of laying down, doing roll downs, have them kneel and do some in a more like cool down kind of way. And you can use the exact same choreography that you chose to use throughout that first sequence and use it with them when they're kneeling. They have a whole other way to do it, right? Maybe we did something that was like a seated hinge, right? You were here and you did like one of these things with them, and then you went like this with them. Just throwing that out there. And then you're at the end of the class and you're out of time. Well, kneel with them and do that. And what does that suddenly become? It becomes like a thigh stretch variation. Or you stand up and you start to be like, okay, let's twist our spine standing. Like you took what you did in the earlier part of the class and you do it another way. The exact same thing, kneeling, standing, you do it again. That's all. You can really take up a lot of time that way. And people are moving. If people are moving, they're happy. So, you don't have to overthink that too much. That would be my good tip there. Oh, and on the apparatus, if it's not a mat class, on the apparatus, that's even easier because we know how much of, the threads between the apparatus, they have a lot of the same exercises just placed somewhere else, right? So maybe you did mermaid on the reformer, or you did mermaid with a push through bar, and now you're at the end of the session. And who's going to say no to doing mermaid again on the chair? Because it's like amazing. So you're like, oh, we did mermaid already, but we're going to do another mermaid, and no one is going to complain. Or you did footwork earlier on the reformer, full spring, real heavy, real hard. You're 45 minutes later, maybe let's go to the chair. We make it lighter, but you do it with one leg, right? You're still doing footwork. So just, I'm making it sound like it's oversimplified, and it's not that simplified, but it is. If you just go in with your list in mind of the 10 exercises you did, and just think like, okay, I'm a person who often comes up short. Which would be the 2 sequences out of this like 9 or 10 that I made that I know how to do in a different position. I know how to do that kneeling, and I know how to do that standing. Good. So if you're running up short, those are your 2 grabs. Okay. So little tips for the first one would be figure out which one of those people you are. Okay, everybody. So this brings me to my third and final section. I hope you found all of this useful. The last of which is just referencing clients themselves, people themselves. Oh, this is such a relationship business. And there's no better tips really than I can say is just build a relationship with a person and the people in front of you. The more that they trust you, and the more that you feel like they are honest with you and you're honest with them, and you can work together. I mean, that's where the relationship and the training really flourishes. But that definitely takes, getting used to how to do that and how to be yourself and whatnot. My best tips as far as people are concerned is, first and foremost, people always, or that's strong, right? Let's not use always. People almost always think that they are capable of less than they are. And teachers almost always think that people are capable of less than they are. So I would open your mind to never making any assumptions about anybody's capability of anything, even based on something you saw them do before. Because I didn't say this in teacher training section, but we learn things as progressions. There's beginner, intermediate, advanced, blah, 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 blah. I kind of put in there that some of that's like hard nonsense too. Somebody can do something very beginner, one exercise, but can do an advanced version of something else, because that's just like, skill sets and what people are good at. So it may be somebody comes in for one session and their spinal articulation is like maybe no bueno on your opinion and needs a lot of work. Well, then you learned that you're not going to be doing ABC if they can't do that first. But you can't make any assumptions. They might be able to do like the craziest version of plank with an arm and a leg in the air and balancing a ball on their head, but they can't do a roll up. I'm making a stupid example because that's the reality of humans. You just can't make any assumptions, and you just don't know what people can do until you ask them to. And most people don't know what they're capable of until they try. So I have that written on a board in my other section of my studio that says you don't know until you try. Because I'll often ask people to do things that they think are like gnarly, like you kidding me? Like, I'm not even doing that. And I just glance at them and I'm like, well, can you just try? Just try. And so many times, like really most of the time they can. Because if we have a good relationship, I wouldn't have asked them to do something that I thought that they had no shot in heck of doing. But as you're just starting to take in clients and to do classes, just try not to make any huge expectations. You want to keep people safe. And there's like a whole other discussion about when it comes to what does that even mean to keep them safe. But ask them to do stuff. Don't put on so much weight that they're going to tear a limb. Don't put on so little that they're going to snap in half. use something that's conservative. I'm just trying to make it. Use something that's conservative that they can try it out and like test the waters. And then as you're seeing how they're doing, progress it from there. But just don't make any assumptions, even outside of each previous exercise, about what they're going to be able to do inside of the next. Maybe I should separate this bullet point, but people need to feel supported. That is most important. They need to feel encouraged that what they're going to attempt to do is feasible and accessible and valuable. And that takes as much mental building up and emotional building up for some people as it does to set up the apparatus correctly. It's really almost peripheral to those first few things. You don't want to say so much about what needs to be right and wrong that they already feel like there's no way in hell they can be successful. So if I'm introducing a new exercise or an exercise type for someone, I keep it really simple. I purposely have like an extra lightness to me when I'm doing it. Like I'm making a joke, I'm setting it up, I'm not even saying anything about it. Hey, we're going to try a thing. And I almost just like slip it in. Like when I deal with the kid and I don't want the kid to like notice I'm about to pull something, and I just kind of like do it real fast. But if we give the person a chance to overthink about like, wow, this is going to be really hard or kind of scary, of course we're going to go there. We're humans. I want them to feel like I'm here, it's cool. Look how like happy and funny this is. I'm going to tell you a story while it's going on. And before they know it, they're already doing it and it's done. And that's where some of the sociology stuff I found really can help. And it's different for every client. Once you learn the person and their way, then you kind of know what works for them. But ultimately, they just need to feel supported and not prepared with like every alignment thing that they're going to do wrong and that it could be unsafe and like to worry about this and the other. I just try to stay away from the negativity. So builds people up and try not to underestimate their abilities, because then they will too. Add on just a couple extra notes about negativity. I think that for like every negative piece of movement advice or body opinion that I've met with a client and they've been told, whether it was like by a doctor or another teacher, or they went to this class once, they were told it once and they will never let it go. Like it was like burned in their memory. And every time they do with that thing, they're like, oh, but that person told me I shouldn't do that. Or that thing isn't bad. That's bad for me. Or the doctor told me that thing that hurt me. And they will never let it go. And I will tell them a positive thing about that very emotion and show it to them and have them do it and reinforce it probably 200 times over the course of 2 years before they finally believe it. And that's humans. One negative thing, one time, we will never let it go. 200 times the same positive statement, and we will yet to accept it. I say that because it's so important that as teachers, we stay away from the negative, reinforce the positive, and any of those things that they come in with, we sometimes do have to try to help them to reprogram. And it's hard. It can really be hard if we've heard something bad about our body, our bad hip and our bad knee, and this is bad. And we believe it's so easy. And that noise that my hip makes when I turn this way, it's bad. I have to avoid it making that noise. The reprogram is hard. So you just want to avoid being one of those people who puts that voice into someone. And you might think like, oh, yeah, okay, like I wouldn't do that. But I did, and a lot of teachers did, because we were taught so much protocol in our teacher trainings that standing like this is wrong, and letting your knee do this is wrong. And if they're laying down and doing this exercise, their back has to look like this or they're wrong. We hear a lot about what's wrong, and we're taught about what's wrong, and then like we're all focused on it, and it absolutely comes out of our mouth, and it's just not something that you want to put into people's mind. And it will take them so much longer to learn to move when they have all of that in their mind, because they're like, well, I don't want to do this bad thing or make my bad hip. It's too much. So try to be the positive person with the positive voice. And my last note on the negatives, as we're just wrapping up, is to be a person and a teacher who always encourages them to do other things, all the things that they enjoy. Another thing that you might be like, well, why wouldn't I do that? But I myself did it, and I know plenty of other teachers that did it, because we became so obsessed with Pilates that other activities and other class types became bad or like less than. Oh, that kind of exercise can be bad for you. Or don't do CrossFit, that's going to hurt you, that's bad. Or oh yeah, I understand why like your hip would be bothering you if you were jumping around in that jumping class, that high impact jumping. Those are bad. I know you hear it, I know you do, and you're like, oh shoot, yeah, I have said that. Those things are not bad. Nothing a person wants to do with their time is bad. If they enjoy it, they should do it, and we should help them to do it and feel better when they do it. Even making some sort of assumption that like the thing that is bothering them in their body that day had anything to do with that activity, and that should mean that they avoid it. Like, it is just not your place to make that judgment or that assessment. When things are so multifactorial, you have no evidence that is why they're in pain. And more movement, the better. Pilates isn't better than other things, it's just different. And we should want them to crave all opportunities to move themselves, remove those barriers, and know that the Pilates will enrich that, and that those things will hopefully enrich the Pilates. And they feel so supported to move that's what they become. They become movers. We do not want to own these people. We do not want to own or them to feel like they subscribe to the Pilates channel and that is where like their movement exists. No, this is not our mission statement as movement teachers. It is to get people to be movers in their life and to feel good in their body and positive about doing it and looking for every opportunity to do it more. So that's more or less what I leave you with, is to be a person who is positive about who you are as a teacher, strong in your style, because you'll have your own. Find what speaks to you, maybe an application type, a client type, whatever, like something that really speaks to you, and go down that road and turn yourself off to all the other noise telling you that you're doing it wrong or that you should be teaching to the other type. Like, whatever is you, do you, as long as you have a positive mindset, a positive voice to these people that you're encouraging, and stay a learner of what's in front of you. Because our realities are just built with our lives, right? And so everything that I've been saying through the course of this video has just been my life experience. Maybe it's not yours, maybe none of it even resonates, but I'm just here to offer up what I've gone through, because at the beginning of my teaching, I was pretty much alone in it. I didn't know any other instructors. I came into this industry from finance, and I was just trying to navigate it on my own, and it was weird. And I think the turn for me was when I was working for a physical therapist for a couple of years. And to be honest with you, wasn't a very good physical therapist, or at least the office structure wasn't great. And they would just send patients back for like these 30-minute Pilates sessions at the end of their phasing out of their allowances before they were discharged, and would give me no education on these things that they were diagnosed with. Like, I was still very, very new to one-on-one trainings, and would hand me a 20-year-old with cerebral palsy who is essentially nonverbal, or someone who was newly diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and hadn't even yet accepted her diagnosis, so she wouldn't admit why certain things were bothering them or her, and why, or would discuss them, in the session when they weren't kind of going well. An 11-year-old with major scoliosis who couldn't write herself up, someone who had just gotten hit by a car and was getting her leg reconstructed and a 90-year-old who walked in with a walker and couldn't do anything more than just like hobble over to me this way. And I was a relatively new teacher, and I went, what do I do? What do I do? I don't know what to do. And the magic of what I saw was that if I just let that relationship flourish and let them show me, let them guide me with what their bodies can do, that movement was magic. The movement. It didn't even matter that much what I had them do in that short period of time. As long as it was accessible for them to do, they felt better. And that was amazing. And that's why I love what I do. And I hope that that's why you wind up loving what you do. Just be with the humans in front of you, and then turn off all the noise. So I hope this time has been useful for you. Please, as a teacher, I am happy to grow a relationship with you. If there's any other assistance and guidance that I can provide to you that I didn't have along the way. Okay, so thank you for joining me and listening to my TED Talk. And I will see you all next time.